Jacobo was, amongst everything, a scientist, but he went into all those directions working with shamans, and also he was a theoretician at the same time. He was doing experiments in the lab. So it's like he has many legs. We could talk about the theory, which I think is the most important aspect, if you would ask him, his synergic theory. But also in the lab, he was doing pioneer experiments in the 70s, maybe the 80s, until 94 when he disappeared. And so one thing they were doing in the lab, they were studying hemispheric coherence. And his lab had the title Human Communication. So they were trying to see what happens in certain meditative states, what happens in the brain, and whether there's coherence amongst the hemispheres. But then they were also testing two people and how both brains would align with each other, would influence each other. And then he went further, and that was actually the last experiment he did before he disappeared. And he was inspired by the EPR, Einstein, Podolsky, Rosen experiment, or this thought experiment. So his final experiment was taking these people that were in interaction, close interaction in the same room, let's say, like the electrons in physics, put them aside in Faraday cages, and then stimulate with some very simple visual stimulus in one case, one of the subjects, and then try to detect if this evoked potential in one subject was transferred to the second subject, and he called this the transferred potential. And it wasn't telepathy per se, but it was like neurobiological basis of non-local communication detected in human brains.
And I understand he performed maybe 50 or 60 experiments of this type with consistent results.
Yes, and of course the results need to be replicated, and I think they have been replicated. And this was a paper that came out from the Freedom of Information Act, and also that's why people say, well, he had ties with the CIA. That doesn't mean that. That just means that the CIA was interested in this kind of research. But there's a paper from 1983, I think, or 92 on bioenergetics.
Now, if I understand correctly, Doña Pachita became his guru, in effect, his teacher, and she seemed to demonstrate over and over again what you might think of as a mastery of time and space, causing objects to apport, to appear out of nowhere or to disappear. And similarly with the healings that she performed. And he witnessed this over and over and over again. And he concluded that she had access to a level of reality, the non-physical level of reality. You could call it the reality of quantum potential, I suppose. And he believed that the whole physical universe emerged out of that reality, so that if one could access that level of reality consciously, then one could exhibit control in magical ways over physical phenomena. The Jewish high holiday of Yom Kippur, where Jewish people typically fast the entire day, instead of going into the synagogue and praying with the other Jews, and there was a strong Jewish community in Mexico, he would go up to the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan and climb to the top of the pyramid and sit at the apex of the pyramid in meditation all day long. What year was this?
This was 1976, in the fall of 76.
Mm-hmm. So I can report, for what it's worth, I had already met Andrea Puharich and worked with him starting, if I remember correctly, around 1972.
Mm-hmm.
And I was at the time a graduate student in Berkeley, but Puharich, in the world of parapsychologists, and in that era, was something of a superstar. He had written a number of books. He had written Beyond Telepathy, exploring the role of the nervous system and psychic functioning. He had written The Sacred Mushroom, one of the early books on psychedelic mushrooms. And he had written Uri. He had discovered Uri Geller. He was already famous for bringing Uri Geller to the United States. Had to do with ELF, extremely low frequency electromagnetic waves.
Right. Based on Tesla's inventions.
Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, in that era, the Soviet Union was experimenting with these signals. We use them too, as a matter of fact, to communicate with submarines, because ELF signals could penetrate the ocean. And the Russians were sending ELF signals. They were called woodpecker signals, as I recall, all across the globe. And Andrea was very concerned about this.
Yes, he was.
And to add to the legend, he was friends with many people in high places. I know, for example, Henry Wallace, who was the former vice president of the United States, was a friend of Puharich, came up to the Round Table Foundation. Arthur M. Young, who was my mentor, the inventor of the Bell helicopter.
Telepathy is feeling together, feeling. And when the Russians found that they killed the young rabbit and the mother rabbit in the submarine and the mother rabbit in the laboratory felt the pain.
Really?
There's a communication of telepathy, but they happen to be separated in space, but the realm of the feelings is not in space.
All right, so it's the feelings that are the conductor here.
People say, well, of course not. Who would do a thing like that? Well, I would remind you that during the Watergate investigation, it was discovered that there was a plan originated in the White House to surface a submarine off the coast of Cuba and paint the Second Coming of Christ over the island of Cuba using holograms. Which is well within our technology today. The idea was that since there is a large Catholic population in Cuba, they would be so upset by this vision that this would saturate the communication channels, the telephone system in Cuba, long enough for an invasion to take place.
How interesting. I never heard of that.
Well, I think that's a classic in psychological warfare, but that kind of manipulation is well understood, and I have personally investigated several apparently genuine UFO cases where there was in fact a manipulation. My conclusion, the conclusion of scientists working with me, was that there was in fact a manipulation taking place, and that it was not a hoax on the part of the witnesses, but a hoax on the part of somebody much better organized than